How you doing? My name's Chris. I'll go through a real brief introduction. Blinn and I both fish on these rivers, Lehigh, Delaware, Susquehanna, Juniata. I'm primarily west, so I'll fish mostly the Susquehanna, Juniata, although I do fish the Lehigh quite a bit because it's proximity to my home. I write for the Pennsylvania Angler magazine. I've been featured in Outdoor Life magazine and in Bassmasters, obviously with Chris and Blinn on the TV program, and a lot of kayak fishing DVDs from a guy in Maryland that I do a lot of work with. The pro staffing thing is growing because of the TV show. I don't list it all here, but River Pro boats, which are outside right now, Gamma Fishing Line, Wilderness Systems kayaks, Confidence baits, Shimano reels, and TFO rods. I'll often go, I usually get gas the morning of the trip because I'm too lazy to go the night before. And so the morning of the trip, I know I got time in the winter, I'll stop and put gas in, and people come to me and go, "Oh, you're going to put the boat away, are you?" I said, "No, I'm going fishing." "You're going fishing? Why would you fish in this weather?" And I wish I had the slideshow because I would just do this. Look at the pictures around here and look at how many people are around me. Look at all the boats that I'm fighting with. Well, that's why. If you're fishing in the wintertime, do not expect to catch 40 to 50 fish generally, except for the fall and the spring. But true winter fishing, cold water fishing, you're not going to catch 40, 50, 60 bass usually. Usually you're going to catch 8 to 20 bass, and 4 or 5 of them are going to be the biggest bass you have ever caught in your life. And that's why we go out. A lot of reason for that, and we'll cover it today. So in today's topics, just real quickly, I want to go over seasonal bass movement. I think that's probably one of the most important pieces that people need to realize how much these bass move or how little based on the water temperature. Cold water lures and presentation, boat control, favorable conditions, and dressing for success. Those are the 5 basic keys. I think if you have those things down there, you'll key into fish. If you know where the fish are, if you know what presentation to be using, if you've got a good boat control, you have to have that boat sitting as still as possible if you want success. And understand the favorable conditions. If you've got temperatures that are steady and high 2 or 3 days in a row, you want to be on that river that third day. And I don't care if you're there in the morning or in the afternoon, you want to be there on that third day. And if you're not dressed warm, you will not fish well. You just won't. If you're not warm, you're going to be too fast, or you're too cold. You're not going to feel the fish. You've got to be dressed right. So just so we can kind of have the same terminology, because I always have people ask me questions about what's a pool, what's a riffle, what's the tail out, what is the headwater. So just let me go through this a little bit. So there's my little drawing for, I'm going to call it riffles for no other better word. And I've got this pool area here. That's the pool, all right? Pool is the water between what I'm going to call the headwater. Here is the water just before it pushes over. It's a smooth water just before it pushes over it. And then we have the tail water. This is the tail water, right? Summertime. Generally speaking, the fish are everywhere. But you're going to get your most active fish in the riffles. So these little, see my little fish? They're all in the riffles. And now they might move around a little bit, but your most active fish, the fish you're trying to catch, I look at it, I want to catch the fish that have a fork and knife in their hand. They've got it all rolled up and they're ready to eat. That's the fish I'm looking for. I don't want to sit here and fish this island tip with the hopes that one of these fish is going to move into this island tip in the middle of summer for a fish. Fall time. We're in fall. They really start to abandon these riffles. Now, there's going to be some of them in there, but they're really going to start to abandon these riffles mid-October, late October. Start to abandon them, and they start to move back into the softer pockets. When the water goes in this headwater here, when the water comes through this, the riffles that are there are blocking the water, the speed, so they can actually be up there. And it's almost like being in a situation where the fish themselves are getting the food particles that are coming down through, and the first ones are usually at the head. Less aggressive ones on the side, and then the ones who are waiting to feed, usually behind it. Likewise, I've got this rocky shoreline, and rocky shorelines in the fall are phenomenal. Phenomenal. If you've got rocks and mud mixed in here and sand, that's a great shoreline to be concentrating on. You can fish this all day long if you want to in the fall. You're not going to get a fish in there unless the water rises. You can fish this little eddy out right here all day long, and you won't get any bites. Same thing with the tail out. When the tail out, what happens is the water goes through hydraulics, and it lifts just before it goes over there, and your fish can actually sit there and burn almost no energy whatsoever, yet they're first in line, even before these guys. These fish up here are first in line before this tail out for any debris that comes down there, food, minnows, crayfish that get swept out into that mid-river current. Susquehanna is usually a much larger river than where the Delaware is. So in the current seam off of a bump out, around the islands, above and below the current, I mean, I drew it here, but this could be 50 feet below it, could be right up against it. It could be 100 feet below it, but right up against it. Once you find where the fish are generally, and if they're at this level here, they're going to be the same one every pool. I mean, if I get in a pattern that says the fish are in the headwaters, I'm going to fish every headwater area that I can think of. And that's just trying to get those active fish. So I'll fish the whole area. Once I feel like I've exhausted the area, I'll go to the very next one and do exactly the same thing. I won't waste time usually in the middle if I'm catching fish in these areas. As it gets colder, these fish are going to do this. And this is the wonderful thing about winter fishing. And I already got done telling you that you're not going to go out there and catch 40 fish, but there will be those days that you will. Because what ends up happening is as the river gets colder, they're going to go to areas. This is a steep shoreline. They're going to go to areas, and no matter how much this river comes up, unless it hits flood stages, they're still safe, right? They can sit behind this little bump out, and they can school up into this whole thing. And what will happen is that the most dormant fish generally will be in the calmest water. And not that you can't get dormant fish to eat, but generally speaking, they'll start to slide out. As they start to slide out, they're in more of a feeding mode, or slide down into faster water. They're more of a feeding mode, and they're easier to catch. Same thing with an island. Sometimes we forget how much the current seam comes off an island. Sometimes the current seam comes off an island and doesn't meet till down here. And in the fall, you can get them down here where they were shown before, but right now they're almost tucked right into that, so that their fish are always facing upriver unless they're running away from something, right? Their nose is always in the current. So this is an area to focus on. Once we get into warmer spells, this could be later winter. It could also be later in the day when the water gets warmer. They'll venture out into this current seam or into this headwater here, where it's just a moderate current, or further down this bank till they get into the current that they like. You asked a question before, where do you want your boat position? Depends on where the fish are biting. If they're biting out in this current seam, you can actually sneak your boat in here some days and do it inside out. Or you can hold way out here and cast in. But when you do that, you've got to make sure that you realize you're casting to the point of this island and letting your bait slowly drop down. And when I say slowly, I mean literally when you're casting out, you know you've got current. This is a lesson to Blaine to tell all his clients. Don't close that bail right away. If you close that bail right away, you're going to close it. It's going to pendulum right back to you. You want that thing to fall straight down. So let this line work its way into the current. Once it's there, you're going to literally move it. You're literally I just call them little tiny taps like that. And if you watch you can't see my bait right now, but it's actually moving at about a half an inch to an inch, and I can control it. Because if you try to do this, look at how far that bail, all I moved was the tip of that rod there, and look at how far that thing moved. I moved out of the range. So Blaine's tip, it's a great tip. I've heard him give it before. When you cast it out, leave that sit. Just let it sit. It'll fall straight down, right? And then when you bring your line over, then you can draw up tight, and you're just bouncing. See how I'm bouncing like that? Just bouncing it. If you're going to come up here later, I'll show you. But you're just bouncing it like that. And if you watch it, I mean, there's not a cat in the country that wouldn't be attacking that thing right now. So that's really what you want to do. You want to give that very slow. All right. Fall mix. Fall's the easiest time in the world to catch fish. I don't care what anybody says. Fall, anything goes. My favorite time to fish because you can't do anything wrong. You can throw almost any kind of bait you want to throw at them. You want to throw tubes or grubs, soft plastics, go ahead, go at them. You want to throw minnow baits or topwater plugs, go ahead, have at it. You want to throw jerk baits or spinning jerk baits or soft spinning jerk baits, you've got them. They're out there eating. They are conditioned that as the sun starts to lose daylight hours and the water temperature drops, they are conditioned to feed. And they're going to feed like crazy during these times of the year, right? So you have that advantage in it. So I call it the fall mix. And it goes really from now, like where we are in October, all the way through December. If you can take the December temperatures, they feed like crazy. We had one of our best days ever in December, and we left at dark because we just want to leave the fish that they're biting that hard. So these big fish are going to feed up, and they're going to put on about, I had a biologist tell me, they're going to put on almost 1/10 to 2/10 of their weight then again in those 2 months. So they're gorging themselves. We were out 2 weeks ago, and I was catching fish that were literally looked like they were on steroids. They were just massive, and they had all bumps on them from the crayfish being jammed in their stomachs. It was incredible. The inside of the boat was covered with claws and tails and whole crawfish. They were everywhere, which is really cool to see. It doesn't smell so good in the afternoon, but it's really neat to see it because they get on, and what they're doing is trying to throw that bait, and they throw that bait by literally trying to throw up everything that's in their stomach. So once you get up in the air, you'll see crawfish parts flying all over the place. But they could be stuffed with crawfish still alive in their mouth and still eat your tube, still eat your jerkbait, still eat your spinnerbait. It's just they can't control themselves. They're just predestined to gorge. So like Blaine had said, when you get there out there in the fall, you can go slow, you can go fast. I'll be working my jerkbait, and I'll work it fast first. If it doesn't work, then I'll work it slower. I'll throw my tube out, and then I just told you how slow I move my jigs. Once they get on fire, I'll rip up and I'll jerk that thing off the bottom like it's moving 4 or 5 feet at a time because it's fall time. Once you find them, you just got to find the cadence that they want, and it's going to be you're catching fish all day long. It's how the fall usually is. Fall time means falling water because usually we get all that rain that comes in. It's usually stabilizing. We've got all that hurricane stuff that comes in, and then it usually stabilizes and becomes very easy for these fish to start to feed. This time normally per year, the Harrisburg gauge is usually 4.6 to 3.5. Right now it's going to 8, but it is a very strange year for us in that regard. Dropping water temperatures. You usually have 50 degrees going down to 40 degrees, so they're not quite ready to get into this winter mode yet. So they're very active, and they're very focused on the fact that your water temperatures are going to range on a daily basis 4 and 5 degrees. Diminishing daylight, which is a trigger biologically for them that, hey, we have to start feeding. It's just like a white-tailed deer. You know, their biology is set up that shorter days means I've got only so much more time to feed, and they realize that. Bass are extremely active. It's their best cold water fishing you're going to have probably than any other time of the year. Very active. If you find them here one day, don't be so sure the next day you're going to find the same spot, but don't give up on them because they haven't moved too far. So move around the pool a little bit more. Move around in that pool section. If you find them in fast water one day, start the very next day at the fast water, but don't be afraid to drift back into that pool and fish moderate water. Don't be afraid to fish points. Don't be afraid to fish and move around. Once you find them, mark it mentally because that's where they're going to be in all the pools that you're going to. And bass are feeding, and they're feeding heavy. They need to get all that body weight because it's got to sustain them through part of the winter. And again, Oktoberfest, anything goes. It's when I have my tackle box is the heaviest. It's because I bring it all out for that. You know, I've got everything going. I don't know what they're going to hit, but I'm going to throw it. So if I've got 3 guys in the boat, we're all going to throw something different until the fish feed. When they feed, they slow down. I'll change again, constantly changing up because the same fish will come over and over again when they're feeding like this because they just go through. And Blaine mentions you get one fish to go. If they're in a pool, a school of fish, they'll all go. January and February can be the most frustrating time or the best time for you because it's one of those situations where you're probably not going to catch a 13 or 14-inch bass at those times of year. You're usually going to catch just absolute slammer hogs.
Chris, can you speak to profile of the baits, especially like this time of year, the size, 4-inch tube, 2.5, all that kind of stuff? It's like right now it seems it's kind of in between.
It is, and I could speak. I don't want to say anything gospel because I'm telling you in 2 years I'll probably change my mind. But 4 years ago you asked me the exact same question. I said you got to throw big tubes. These fish are eating. They're eating. I mean, some of the minnows that they throw up on my boat are literally 6, 7, 8 inches long, chubs, whole, throwing them up my boat. A fish that's only like 18 inches is throwing up a bait that's almost half its own size in length. Now, obviously not in width, but they're eating big. So I threw big tubes. Now I throw small stuff. I throw smaller stuff that's in it that they'll eat. So I like a 3-inch tube, a 3.5-inch tube. I like a skinnier single dip profile. I like smaller In the fall time, I like smaller jerk baits. I'll start out with a 6 or an 8 centimeter and maybe go to a 10 later on, but I like smaller profile things. Winter is exactly that way. Once you get to winter, I think they're eating a lot of insects and a lot of invertebrates. So I think by going small, you're actually triggering on to the match the hatch type kind of deal. So I like them small. January, February is a quite a bit different time of the year. I usually go to almost all jigs. If I know there's walleye or muskie in the ground, I will throw a spinnerbait or a jerk bait. I'll throw it very slow though. But I really like small jigs, narrower profile. I don't have any tubes shown here, but I will fish a tube. I like hair. I like creature baits like our worm. And I've usually fished them anywhere from an 1/8 to a 3/16 to a 1/4 ounce head, depending upon wind and water flow. Just briefly, we carry our own jigs, and that's the daughter jig. And what I'll do is, people say, well, why do you make it 3.5 inches when I want a 3-inch bait? Well, just knock this piece of it off with either your scissors or your teeth, and put it on your jig, and you can make them 3.5, 3.25, 2, 2.5, 2 3/4, and it doesn't really much matter. They all work really well. The next one is our Chris Crinkle worm. That's my favorite jig right now. That jig has given me more fish in the last 1.5 to 2 years than I would have ever guessed. That's my opinion, that's our best jig. Wintertime means stable, clear water. Generally, we don't get it. October, usually it's stable and clear, and bass like that. I prefer a little higher water and a little less clear, but usually it's 5, 6, 7 foot. In the wintertime, it doesn't usually get above 7 foot in the winter. It usually doesn't get below 4.5 foot in the winter. It's very stable. The watercolor is stable usually. We don't get a lot of storms that bring, even if we get snow melt, it doesn't raise the river that much. We just don't get a lot of. It also means the lowest water temps. I don't like to fish when the water temperature is below 35 degrees. Doesn't mean you can't catch them. Usually I'm sitting on the couch. And I'm looking for that spike where we'll go from 34 or 33 degrees to that 36, 37, 38. And if I get 40, I might take a couple of days off work because it's going to be that good. On the Susquehanna, you have to worry about it freezing because it freezes usually by the first week of January. But if you can get to either below the warm water discharges or an area where it hasn't stocked in yet, you got some creeks coming in, it'll stay open for longer periods of time. Shortest duration of the daylight, our shortest days in December. So all that whole month of January is just really short daylight, just really short. I like to be out noon to dark. That's my favorite time to be out. But it doesn't mean the fish aren't eating in the morning. I know for sure there's warmer situations. Bass are very lethargic. They are eating, but they're not very active. Mostly in these cases, your biggest fish are going to be ones that are eating because they've got to maintain that body mass. So when I'm out, I always tell people, well, what's the biggest fish you've ever caught? And some people will say to me, well, 15, 16 inches. I said, today we should break it. We should break it and we should crush it. No question about it. We should be able to beat your records on large fish. Slower, longer pauses. Jerkbait pauses. I've seen guys catch fish on jerkbaits, letting that jerkbait sit 30, 40, 50 seconds, and that's painful. You almost have to fish it like you're fishing a minnow. Letting it sit in a spot. But I can tell you that it really works. It really works on walleye too. It really works really well. On that tube, I have a friend, Jeff Little, and we have a fish staring contest, we call it. Who's going to move the bait first, the fish or me? And so I'll let that thing sit out there, and I'll pretend I'm having a staring contest. And I will let that bait sit out there. I'll move it and let it sit there for as long as I can possibly manage it. Then I'll move it a little bit more. And I will demonstrate this, and I apologize for the tables, because you can't see this very well. But I'm going to try to cast here. Oop, over it. Try again. Try to cast it to the middle and see what happens. Okay. When I throw that in, leave the bail open. Blaine mentioned it, but leave the bail open so it doesn't pendulum back to your boat, because you want the thing to fall straight down off the bank. Close it with your hand. That'll make it last a lot longer. And then what I do is I just move my arm like this, just a little bit up and down like this. And I'm moving that bait, and I'll stop, give it a few seconds. And in the water, the silicon and the tail are constantly moving. And I'll move a little bit, and I'll pause. And then I'll move a little bit, and I'll pause. When I get a little bit higher than this, I'm going to go a little bit higher. I've learned my lesson by not going all the way to the top. I love to fish at the top, but what ends up happening is, especially if you're on TV, that bass is going to hit when you're on top, and you're not going to have a good hook set. So I'll reel down a little bit, feel the tension, and I'll start over. And I'm just literally moving it like that. If you sweep it, you see how much that moved it, and it gets back out in the current, and a 3-foot swip or 4-foot swip could move that bait literally right out of the strike zone. And now you're fishing it still, but it's way off the fish. So I always go slow, especially in February, really slow. Another thing is, I love cork handles, I really do. But in the wintertime, I prefer foam because I think it holds my heat better in the rod tip. This one has no metal in this whole area, so I can hold even my reel that I selected it doesn't have metal on it. It's either composite or I think it's composite or plastic. These are composite, but it doesn't zap my body temperature like metal will. So one of the things that I've noticed in the year, this is also extremely light. I don't get fatigued when I'm out there. It's just things to help you out if you're going to be serious about fishing in the winter. Boat control. Blaine is probably one of the best boat control people I know. I use an electric with a GPS on it. That's how I do mine. He uses the older, more reliable style of a cable steer. But I like to be very, 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 very still when I'm fishing. So I'll put the GPS on a mark, and I'll try to hold this as still as possible because the easiest way to catch fish is when your boat is in that current seam. When it's in that current seam, it holds the boat there. You can run your trolling motor, and you can work effectively all the spots. Generally speaking, these are your most aggressive fish. The ones that are out closest to the seam on the top and the ones that are out closest to the seam on the bottom. Those are usually your most aggressive fish. But if you're not catching anything, don't be afraid to throw out just a little flip, right beside the boat. Because we find a lot of times that we're catching fish out here where it's way away from the bank, and yet we're still catching fish here. Unlike Blaine, I don't think Blaine likes to do it, but I use my anchor a lot more in the winter than any other time of the year. My main reason is I'm fishing a smaller area. I know exactly where the fish are. I'll throw my anchor out, and if I have to move it, I'll just move my boat down 50 feet with the anchor line. Once I'm anchored, I know I'm not moving. So if the boat's moving, this is not happening to me. I'm not doing this, right, when the boat's moving. And it doesn't take much, right? That boat's moving in and out of the current. I don't have to worry about going in there and spooking the fish either. My boat's locked. I can fish it very effectively, and I either pull it up afterwards and I go. And here's a few that Cabela's sells and some that they don't. But this is a Richter anchor, extremely expensive, but works very well. This is your regular river anchor, also works extremely well and less expensive. And this is one made out west. It's called a Clavey river anchor. And what you do is this thing comes off of here, and you can fill it with lead shot. And you can make this go from 10 pounds to 35 pounds with your shot, so you can control the ballast. So if I know I'll be fishing heavier water, I'll fill it to 35 pounds. If I know the night before I check and everything's fine, I don't feel like lifting that crazy thing out of the water, I can just fill it halfway with ballast, and I've got myself into a situation where I'm not trying to pull a 35-pound anchor every time. And it doesn't have much to get caught on. It's using mostly weight. So this is the one I use the most. It's about half the price of a Richter, but it doesn't grab as good as Richter does. But it works based on weight. But like I said, once I'm in that position, I don't have to worry about moving anybody around. Plus, if we get a big fish on, I can jump off the trolling motor and help them land the fish, so it's on. For me, it's a very easy, relaxing way to fish. Late winter, end of February and March is really an exciting time because you start to get away from the jigs a little more and start to get back into those minnow pattern fishing. So I'm a big, big fan of gold and any kind of minnow-looking jerkbait that has a little bit of orange on the belly. I really like that for the Susquehanna. I like yellows or oranges on the belly. I don't care really what the top color is, although I will throw to what it is. If the water's ultra clear, I'll go real light. I'll go purples and yellows and whites, ghosts, clears. But the more that it gets into the first part of the year, I'm throwing a lot of these gold colors. Hot steel's my favorite, but I know a lot of people don't like it because of the crazy colors it has on it. But that's really my favorite time of year for throwing those baits. I'll do it in the fall too, but in the fall, you get tired of catching them on jerkbait, you throw a crankbait. You get tired of catching them on crankbait, you throw a spinnerbait. Tired of throwing that, you can throw it. It's just, that's the way it works in the fall. In the spring, they're coming out of it, and the bass are starting to get into a mode because we have rising stained water usually. When the water rises, it moves the fish around. If you go there one day and you caught them at 4 foot and expect to go there at 6 foot on the gauge and catch them, you're not going to catch them in the same spot. We have rising water temps as well. So as the water temperature rises, usually during the day is the hottest point, those fish will move into an area where, they're just blowing up. Oh, I have fished this spot in the morning, I gave up at home. Talked to another guy who came in after you that had 40 fish. And then you fished the exact same spot. All I can tell you is this time more than any time of the year, put your hours in because you're going to get on a bonanza. It just might not be when you're there. It's first thing in the morning. So if you stick it out, I've learned this lesson from Blaine. If you stick it out, you're going to get that hour where it's just lights out. You can't wait to get back in. And if anything, you're fishing too fast because there's a fish there and you want to get them on the line. Increasing hours of daylight means increasing hours of fishing. So pick your best hours. I'm out there dark to dark, but and I can't say mornings are better than afternoons in this time of year. Although the water is generally warming up, I like to be out there dark to dark, but be out there noon to dark in these winter cold water times. That is your best opportunity. And I'll also pick my best hole as my last hole of the day. Because while we get cold, that water temperature is not going to drop very fast. So the warmest rise in the water is around 2 o'clock. But I'm telling you, 4 o'clock, that water ain't much different. And you're freezing because the sun's gone. You can't even see it anymore. But that water temperature is still the same temperature. Another thing that you need to think about is what light does to exposed rock. You've got a big rock that goes down into the river. It's causing an eddy that you like to fish. That direct sun's hitting it. You want to be near that rock from noon on because that sun is heating that rock, and that's transferring that heat right back into it. Wood, not so much, but cement. Cement is a huge area. If you can find a piece of cement or riprap or something that goes into the water that's either metal or cement, think about how that warms up during the day with that hot sun. Did you ever, even in the wintertime, put your hand on a piece of cement? It's like, wow, that's really warm. Macadam, cement, old roads that go into it. But it heats it up and it starts to transfer along that. So sometimes the fish will be in the softest parts and literally move on real close, shallow water, up into those things during the day when it's bright sun. Especially if there's a part of it that's exposed to the sun. Out of the water and exposed, they heat up and they're wonderful. Another thing too is summertime is where you're going to find a lot of these holes. Do not be afraid to wet wade. It's hot in the summertime. Find yourself a spot where you walk through and go, whew, that's a cold spring there. 50-degree water in the summer is freezing cold. That same spring in the winter is throwing 50-degree water, it's coming from the ground, into that area that is really only at 40 degrees. So it's going to mix, and it's only going to make it 42 or 43 degrees, but let's face it, those fish are going to be just downwind of those springs. If you can find those springs in the right kind of water, soft bottom, moderate to low current, my goodness, you've found yourself a treasure, an absolute treasure. It's one of those things I always tell my kids, I'll leave it to you in my will. I'm not telling anybody else about it. I found a spring in mid-river. I'll tell you, you can see it in my will. Again, late winter, bass are becoming far more active. They come out of that wintertime, they're actually ready to feed. They're getting ready for the spawn. Spawn times, if you know the patterns of the bass, they're not going to eat for like 2 or 3 weeks straight. So they're going to come out and they're going to gorge themselves, and it's a very fun time to fish. Post-winter feeding bag, and bass are out and about. That's the only problem with spring. Sometimes you have to find the fish in the spring. Sometimes you have to do more boat movements and things to find stuff in the spring. Kind of like you get the benefits of big fish, but you've got to go out there and find them because with the rising water and they're moving to different breeding things, they're on this forage fish now, and they're on this forage structure later, so you have to do it. Dressing for success. Layer up, and I do mean layer up. But if you layer up, you can take clothes off, right? So go in it with as warm as you possibly can. So I'll use polypropylene long underwear. Do not use any cotton. I'm telling you, stay away from cotton if you possibly can in the wintertime. Polypropylene, it's basically like a silk, but it's a little cheaper, a little less expensive, and it holds the moisture in, and it holds the heat in, lets the moisture out. Fleece middle layer, I am a huge fan of fleece. And I like black fleece or dark green fleece or dark blue fleece because I want it to be dark. So when that sun hits it, it warms me up. These are wader liners. They sell them, they usually go on sale. They usually go on sale for about $25. When they do, I usually buy 3 or 4 pair. But I've had these for 5, 6, 7 years, and they wear really well. You don't wear them out. But you wear this as your middle layer, and you're extremely comfortable. I mean, you could really get wet during the day, fall in, and these will be dry by the end of the day. They're great. My top portion of that, I like something that has a collar on it or something I can zipper up so I can get it tight around my neck. Because if my neck gets cold, my face gets cold, the whole body, the whole core area starts to get cold on me. So this is what I want for that fleece middle layer. If anybody can find something better than Gore-Tex, please call me. I'll pay you a finder's fee. I've tried a lot of different stuff. Gore-Tex to me is the way to go. And I just get Gore-Tex. These are not insulated. I don't use insulated stuff because I've got my insulation there. And I like bibs in the wintertime because I've got my core doubly set up, right? This is wonderful till wind starts blowing. It goes right through it. Right now, when I come through and I have this on, I've got this whole thing set up, and I've got myself covered here to top, and if the temperature drops or goes up, I can put my jacket on or off, right? Because you'll see a lot of pictures we're playing our fishing, and our bibs are on, and our fleece is on, and that's all you'll see. Another thing from a thermal standpoint is, and it's new law, wear your life vest. You'll see most of my pictures, you'll see me, I have my life vest on. Very rarely do I not have it on in the wintertime, and I don't like people on my boat too often, except for Blaine, they won't wear their life vests. Because to me, if you fall over and that hits you, shocks, and you take a gasp of air, you can get water in your lungs, and I might not be able to get to you fast enough. So I want to make sure that I can get to you and get you on the boat. Life vest is the way to go, and it acts as a thermal device. It really does. It acts as an extra layer of thermal that you should wear. Waterproof boots and hand warmers. If you get wet feet before you go out there, let's say the boat gets away from you, or it's a little bit tougher to launch and you get your feet wet, oh my goodness, you've just shot yourself for the day. Hand warmers are great because even if you don't use them in the morning, it only takes them about 2-3 minutes before they're up to temperature. You can put them in your gloves. I don't wear gloves, but you can put them in your gloves, or you can put them in your pocket. And you can put them, I actually sometimes will put them in my hand and hold the rod just so I get some warmth in my hand, just to get that feeling back in my hand. You can put them in your pockets, in your chest. These waders all have pockets on the top. You can dump a couple of them in the pockets of your chest. Keep your core warm. When your core warm, you're able to focus on fishing and not go, oh my goodness, am I cold? Because when your head goes, generally that's the way that your fishing is going to go as well. Favorable conditions, I'm just going to go through it a little bit. I hate those bad 4-letter words, and I know we have some children in the audience, I'm not going to use them. My 4-letter words are wind and rain. Wind in the wintertime is a killer because it takes your feeling away from your line. It takes literally the feeling. You get wind going and I'm going to put a bow on my line artificially. But when you're fishing and your line is bowed over to here because the water's blowing up there or all the way up here, you do not feel that bait. You think you do, but you don't. You're not feeling that. You're feeling there's so much wind pressure on the tip of your rod and on that it's just blowing all the way out there. And if it's really bad wind, I will not use braid. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but braid floats like kite string in the air. So when I know I'm going to be using windy, I'll use a copolymer instead because I think it works better on really windy conditions. Even though I think the braid transfers the strike better up the line into my rod, the copolymer is not that far off, and I don't get that wind issue. This stuff's very, very prone to wind. So if you can avoid the wind and the rain, you're in great shape. So if I've got 3 days and I can see a rainstorm coming, I know a front's coming, I want to fish the day that rain's coming or the day before it's coming. That's just how usually it's the calm before the storm. That's when the pressure starts to go from high to low, and those are great opportunities to fish. Watch for the 3-day warm-up. That's one of Blaine's greatest tricks. I don't know if he dubbed it himself, but I adopted it because it really works. If you see 4 or 5 days where that water, it's been 30 degrees, and all of a sudden it jumps up to 45 for 3 days in a row, man, be there that last day. Be there on that 3rd day. Afternoon delights, I want to be fishing the best possible water I can in the afternoon. As a matter of fact, I'll drive a distance to make sure that I'm going to be hitting my last spot of the day. That's my favorite, most productive hole. Because while I get cold at 4 o'clock because the sun just went down, that water temperature is not going to go anywhere. It's warmed up all day long, and it's at its warmest part of the day, usually, right around 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Sunny high pressure days are killer any other time of the year except for cold water. I love high sun, I love blue skies, and it can be as bright as possible. I do not care. I want it to be as warm as possible. Not that you won't catch them on cloudy days, but usually it's one of those cloudy days where it's got that lower atmospheric pressure, it's got the heat trapped into our area. You'd rarely get the fish unless it's been an area where there's a front that's moved through and is trapping the stuff in. Another piece is know the creeks and springs. I spend a lot of time in the water with my snorkel gear in the summertime. Summertime is when I find almost all of my winter holes. I look at the shoreline. I like a mix of shoreline. I like mud, sand, and rock. If I can get that to a little bit of a shoreline that's got softer bottom, but it's got a little mix of rock in it, just to just change in the piece, I do really well. Other things to look for are steep banks. I really like steep banks. Generally, if the bank is steep, it follows down to the bottom of the water. I mentioned sunny, high-pressure days. Know the creeks and spring, I mentioned that. And the other thing is BioEdge. Let me play just a little role, and I'll give you a little bit of a feedback on it. BioEdge, it's a little wand that I keep. It's pretty much crawfish scent or minnow scent. And we were fishing Presque Isle Bay in Erie. Ice off was about a couple weeks earlier. Very cold morning. I mean, I have a hat on. You'll see how bundled up we are. And what we noticed first off was the fish were biting and spitting the bait before they were actually taken. We couldn't set the hook on them. And as soon as I changed to that, now I'm putting it on. Chris is rolling the whole time. I'm putting it on.
Missed another one. See, they don't have.
And that's very mild because usually he's like, oh.
That's 3 misses.
Here, buddy. I got something to fix that for you.
The BioEdge wand.
That'll fix that problem.
That sounds like a plan, man.
I think what's happening is they'll pick it up and realize it's not real. You can get them to hold on for a split second more. You're on. Just like that. See? Just like that.
What you got there, Chief?
That's another largemouth, I think. Yep.
I'm going to put this BioEdge right at the net. It's on that ledge.
You got it, Puss. A few short strikes, honestly, a few short strikes. Put a little bit of attractant on it. They were using the BioEdge, and it's working phenomenal for us. It's just the extra,
I wasn't using it.
It's just an extra split second.
I didn't put it on my tube. My tube has scent in it.
Camera hasn't stopped rolling.
I did not put BioEdge on my tube. My tube
first
had
cast
scent
after
in it, so I
BioEdge?
didn't put any on these first few fish. And
I can tell when Blaine's getting a strike. You can see it in his body.
I've had 2 fish grab it.
There it is. BioEdge, baby. Oh my goodness.
And I caught him on the outside of the mouth, and I missed 2. It's a largemouth.
Another largemouth. Pretty looking fish.
Those largemouth just don't have the size to them either that the smallmouth do.
See how the tube came out of his mouth?
That was a male there.
They were barely hitting it.
Oh boy. That's a horse there.
This is a small one.
That's a horse. That is a horse. It's
Camera rolled for about 18, 19 minutes. This is just the whole thing. We were missing it before as soon as we put the BioEdge on it. And that's, I think, the day that you became a believer. Made a big difference.
Nice fish. What's his secret? It's wacky worm where bass is king. Crankbaits, spinnerbaits, jerkbaits, and more. Check out our 70-foot wall of plastics. Over 800 rods and reels from the leading manufacturers, plus our own handcrafted jigs and soft plastic lures. For tons of tackle and friendly service, Wacky Worm, the true secret in fishing.
When it comes to fishing, there's a fine line between failure and success. There's a fine line between winning and losing. There's a fine line between the trophy and just another fish story. That line is gamma. Gamma, molecularly altered fishing line.